Heyo everyone, and welcome back to another comic review. This time we're reviewing Englewood. Now I'll be honest, I almost forgot this comic even existed. I backed it a while ago. And of course there's always a lot of other comics coming out on Indiegogo. But finally, Englewood is completed, and I gotta tell you, it's pretty good. So first thing I just have to go over is the art. The art is very stylistic and at times very expressive, but it's also kind of stiff. And I know a lot of people who have relatively stiff art, some things that they need to work on. I tend to notice that people who have stiff looking art also tend to struggle with things like perspective and dynamic shots. And you can kind of see that reflected here. But despite all that, I still really like the artist, mainly just because of how expressive these faces are. They're very good at those caricature type faces and very good at getting emotion across with ease. I also think that action sequences are usually pretty well done and easy to follow. And because of the over-exaggeration and the caricature-like style, it really is good at making those intimidating characters look really intimidating. So I do like the artist, despite them struggling with stiff poses and some dynamic shots. This right here is probably a good example. This throw looks kind of weak. I don't think it's being shown at the right angle, first of all. I don't think this should be a flat shot for a throw that's supposed to be pretty powerful. And of course, even in this shot, you got like these guys on the ground. He kind of looks like he's out of the perspective, like he's not matching up. Even so, I wouldn't necessarily change off the artist, but I would ask them to, you know, do more practice for the next book. Practice making the art a little bit less stiff, some, you know, perspective shot practices that should help with more dynamic stuff in the future. The coloring is also kind of just okay. The lighting and the shading all looks about right, but I'm not really a huge fan of the color choices per se. Mostly in this beginning sequence. I mean, it starts off with like this really cool fighting sequence. You're already on board. But they have the enemies against what is kind of a bland tan background. And then you got the outside, which is mostly very dark blue. And the main character is wearing black on black against a almost black background. Basically, it's just really dark. There's not too much contrast, so sometimes you kind of like really have to really look to see that main character between this guy with the dark tank top and this dark background. He's like really hiding there, you know? Now obviously it's nighttime, so it's gonna be dark outside. But you can use a more prominent blue color to help the background stand out, or even purple colors. Purple is also used for nighttime, sometimes even pink. Because you got a guy with a black cape, black armor, black mask, fighting against a almost black background. He's also black, fighting black people. So a little bit of contrast would just really help it a lot. And I know I've mentioned tan backgrounds before, just that kind of bland, yellowy color. I would avoid tan backgrounds as much as possible. It's something about the color that just makes it seem so dull, like you're at a funeral or something. It could also just be me, because I've never liked the color tan. Another thing that's added in is these textures. You can kind of see them on the walls here, a little bit on his shirt. The textures on the walls, I would argue, aren't really that necessary. They're okay, they don't really bother me that much, but I don't really feel like they need to be there most of the time. You know, I'm not looking for this wall to look hyper realistic, and I think the textures sometimes actually hurt the art, because especially on this shot here, once again, you really have to like look closely to see the glass breaking because of this window being so highly textured. It really blends with the effect of the glass breaking. So you get the sound, you hear the sound effect of the crack, but you really have to like be looking for it to actually see it. Speaking of sound effects, the lettering is fine. Basically all the sound effects you see here are the very basic sound effects that you can download online. Now getting to the story, like I said, it opens up with this action sequence. This vigilante dude is busting some gang members, and and he's rocking the Tom Fuzz Talum style. I love it. I think it's a really good opening sequence. It's very easy to enjoy it. It's just like mindless good fighting, but you also get to see some real life self-defense techniques being used every now and then, which I always appreciate seeing in comics that have hand-to-hand combat. And like I said, the action was really easy to follow, and I know that sometimes artists will struggle with making the action hard to follow, so that's definitely something notable. So after a long, hard night of fucking people up, he rests in this van with his friend who is helping him out, and we got a little bit of narration before we get, you know, a big flashback sequence that basically tells his story. You know, record scratch, turns towards the camera. You might be wondering how I got here. But as much as I make fun of that, I actually think it's done pretty well in this comic, to the point where I didn't even notice it was one of those things. And you see that there's a lot of narration on this page. There's a good bit of narration through the comic. I think it's really well written narration, although I still stand by the belief that 90% of narration in comic books can just be removed. So his story about how he got there starts off with this podcast. He's being interviewed for being a former heavyweight champion, and there is some heavy narrating in these next few pages. This is the narration that I don't like in the comic. That beginning narration I thought was pretty good. This narration that comes with this podcast was pretty... It was pretty exhausting. I think the big problem is this podcast lasts way too long. Actually, what is this? 2? Alright, so I just counted. This podcast lasts for 11 pages. Like I said, it lasts way too long. This podcast should not last 11 pages. Now, the point of him being interviewed is it's supposed to show what his backstory is, and in theory, that's a good idea. You know, have him be interviewed. That's how a lot of characters, especially characters who like used to be famous for something, that's how a lot of those characters get to talk about themselves a little bit and make it less forced, you know? Because of course, if you're being interviewed, you're going to talk about yourself and talk about your past and how you got here. But you could have summarized this all up in like 5 pages. This like short story about this German kickboxer that he was fighting. I didn't need to know who the heck this German kickboxer is. I didn't need to know the whole story behind their rivalry, you know? It didn't really matter. The important part of the story is that he got hurt and he started taking painkillers. That's the part that I need to know about. Everything else, you can cut that up. You can get your point across in a single sentence that he had a rivalry with this one boxer. And then another sentence you can say that he got injured during that fight. Because it's this stuff that's the important stuff to his character. It doesn't really matter what kind of rivalry he had going on with that other boxer. Those 11 pages, they kind of dragged out a bit. I felt like it needed a little bit of editing, but that's just how I edit. If I don't really need to know the full details of something, then don't explain it in full detail to me. I'm all about snip snip, get rid of the tip. So he explains that now he has his own gym and he helps kids by teaching them, you know, fighting and learning discipline and keeping them off the streets. And hey look, one of the people he trained. It's Amari, guys. She does have kind of a resemblance. She got the hand wrappings, the red hair, got the top. Although Amari has way bigger tits than that, let's be real. So one day, an incident happens. One of his students is having a little bit of issues with his brother being part of a gang, and he doesn't want to get involved in any of that. He wants to go straight. He wants to go to college. So naturally, when he comes and starts causing an incident like I'm taking my bro back with me, the main character wants to stand up for his student. So after some trash talking, he challenges him to a duel, but not with Yu-Gi-Oh cards. No. The deal is they're gonna go into the boxing ring together, and if he can walk straight afterwards, then he can take his bro with him. Now, of course, he knows, everyone there knows, that he can kick this guy's ass. Kicking ass is kind of what he does for a living. But of course, this guy has too much pride, so he's like, oh yeah, you're on, let's duel. And he snaps his knee backwards. Complete and utter failure, he walks out of there like a sad puppy dog. But then one day all the kids and families of the gym are having an outside activity, and they're outside doing some exercise, and he's kind of coaching them. And that's when you-know-who shows up yet again, this time with a few friends. And he found out his weakness. Guns. So they see this outside activity going on, and they do a drive-by. Miraculously, all the bullets fly past him and hit the people who were exercising. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where it ends. Now, I think that is a great ending, honestly. To a first issue, that is really compelling. You have this character who wanted to just make a difference in the lives of people, now taken to a vigilante extreme because he's seen the lives of people that he cares about taken away. So his vengeance is taking down the gangs of Chicago. So of course this issue is an origin story, and I usually like it when first issues are origin stories, because then it gives you the opportunity to understand who this character is, what their motivation is, what they're after, and if you're on board with all that, then you can hop onto the series. But also, it's its own contained story of how he became who he is at the beginning of this issue. It's a very classic outline for any superhero story, but it was executed very well. Basically, the only real criticism I have on the story part is that it got pretty slow in the middle there. I don't think that interview should have lasted 11 pages. But the first issue did exactly what it needed to do. It got me interested in seeing a second issue. I want to see what this guy's journey is. I want to see what kind of conclusion he'll reach in the end. So if you've read Englewood, tell me what you think down below in the comments section. As usual, remember to like the video if you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye! Program restart.